You're listening to Systemic Error Podcast. The failure was designed.
Trump just gave a huge gift to Russia that will upend global power, based on an article by Nick Hilden. Trump didn't relax sanctions. He advertised that U.S. rules are optional, the real center of power. The headline fact here is not Turkey, India, or Russian arms buyers. It is that the White House controls enforcement. CAATSA was written by Congress with overwhelming bipartisan support, but the executive branch decides whether it bites or becomes decorative. That means the president is not merely a manager of policy. He is the gatekeeper who can turn sanctions into leverage or into theater. Trump used that power. According to the reporting, he chose to lift CAATSA restrictions on Turkey so it could receive F-35 fighters, even though Turkey had already been sanctioned for buying Russia's S-400 system. That is not confusion. That is a decision. A decision that rewards defiance. The political logic is brutally simple. If a government can buy Russian weapons, absorb the sanctions risk, and then wait for Washington to blink, the sanctions regime stops functioning as a deterrent. It becomes a negotiation tactic for the powerful and a warning label for everyone else. That is the real consequence of Trump's move. It does not just affect Ankara. It teaches every other arms buyer that U.S. punishment is contingent, selective, and reversible when politically convenient. Once that lesson spreads, the credibility of the sanction regime erodes faster than any formal repeal could manage. The misdirection is the point. The source text does something important. It keeps pulling blame back to the institutional lever, not the weaker actors around it. That matters, because the usual diplomatic language tries to bury responsibility in passive constructions and geopolitical fog. But the choice here was not made by markets, tensions, or complexities. Trump made it. The article also exposes a familiar dodge inside U.S. foreign policy. India, Indonesia, and Vietnam are presented as governments reacting to Washington's posture, but the actual pattern is one of executive inconsistency. When the White House signals that enforcement is negotiable, foreign governments do what states always do: they test the boundary. The problem is not that they are clever. The problem is that U.S. policy invited the test. Bipartisan rules, selective enforcement. CAATSA was built with bipartisan votes and sold as a hard line against Russia's military ecosystem. The law that depends on executive will can be hollowed out from the Oval Office without a single congressional repeal. That is the structural weakness the story exposes. Congress gets to perform toughness. The president gets to decide whether toughness means anything. That gap is where sanctions go to die. It also explains how the same system can publicly condemn Russia while quietly making exceptions whenever allies, weapons deals, or strategic vanity get in the way. Russia benefits from American softness. The practical winner in this arrangement is not Turkey. It is Moscow. If Russian arms exports can keep moving because Washington is unwilling to enforce its own penalties consistently, then U.S. sanctions stop functioning as a barrier and start functioning as a suggestion. Grossman's warning about the Indo-Pacific is the larger story. Trump's reversal in Turkey does not just concern one deal. It tells countries that rely on Russian systems that the United States may tolerate violations if the geopolitical mood shifts. That is exactly how a sanctions architecture gets downgraded from deterrence to bargaining chip. The pattern. This is the deeper political pattern. American institutions love punitive tools, but too often hand their meaning to an executive who can suspend them for convenience. The result is not strength. It is arbitrary power dressed up as statecraft. Trump's move is not a mistake inside the system. It is the system working as designed when accountability is weak and enforcement is discretionary. Congress writes the law. The president decides whether it matters. Foreign governments know this. Russia profits. And the American state, once again, confuses control with credibility. You've been listening to Systemic Error. Thanks to Alternet for today's article. With the automated voice of Sam, thanks for listening.